You got a pay rise this year. A genuine one, not a token gesture, the kind of number that should have felt like progress. The kind you might have mentioned to a partner over dinner with something close to relief. And yet somehow staring at your bank account on a Tuesday evening, you feel exactly as squeezed as you did 5 years ago. Maybe more so. You didn't buy anything reckless. You didn't upgrade the car, book an extravagant holiday, or change your lifestyle in any way you could point to. The number on your payslip went up. Your actual life did not. You start doing the mental arithmetic that so many people your age are quietly doing right now. You are earning more than you were in your 20s, considerably more in some cases, and yet the sense of room, of slack, of breathing space feels thinner than it did back then, not wider. Something does not add up, and it is not your maths that is wrong. This is not a story about bad budgeting. This is not a story about avocado toast or lattes or any of the small mocking explanations people reach for when they cannot explain why the middle of Britain feels perpetually behind. This is a story about three quiet mechanisms working simultaneously against you, none of which show up as a single headline tax rise, and all of which are right now fully switched on. Here is the number that should genuinely unsettle you. Since the year 2000, UK median full-time earnings have more than doubled in cash terms, from roughly £18,848 to £39,039. It sounds like enormous progress. But once you strip out inflation, the real gain over that entire quarter century sits at somewhere between 10 and 15%. Meanwhile, over the same period, house prices have grown by roughly 267%. Wages crawled forward by single digits per decade. Housing sprinted. You are not imagining the gap. You are living inside it. Let's start with the mechanism almost nobody has a name for, even though it is quietly reshaping the entire middle of the income distribution. It is called fiscal drag, and it works like this. Income tax thresholds, the point at which you start paying tax, and the point at which you jump into the higher 40% band, are supposed to rise each year in line with inflation. Since April 2022, they have been frozen instead. Not lowered, simply frozen while wages and prices around them kept climbing. That freeze has now been extended all the way to April 2031. Here is why that matters more than it sounds. If your salary rises to keep pace with inflation, but the tax-free threshold above it does not move, then more and more of your income gets quietly dragged into taxable territory every single year, without a single tax rate ever technically going up. Your pay slip shows a bigger number. Your actual take-home share of it shrinks. This is precisely why a genuine pay rise can leave you feeling no richer at all. A meaningful part of it was never really yours to keep. It just hadn't been announced yet. The scale of this is no longer a rounding error. Basic rate taxpayers are on track to lose up to £700 in the current tax year alone, purely because the personal allowance has not kept pace with inflation, according to analysis from A.J. Bell, rising to nearly £960 a year by 2030. Higher rate taxpayers face something considerably steeper, up to £3,500 more in tax this year than they would have paid if thresholds had simply tracked inflation, as they used to. Zoom out to the national level, and the number becomes almost impossible to ignore. UK taxpayers paid £153.7 billion in income tax and national insurance in a single recent month alone, nearly £10 billion more than the same month the year before. Income tax receipts overall have climbed by more than half since the freeze began in 2021, not because tax rates rose, not because anyone voted for an increase, but because the threshold simply stopped moving while everything else kept climbing around them. This is, by design, a tax rise that never had to be announced, debated, or defended in a single headline. And here is the part that explains why this specifically targets the middle rather than the very top or the very bottom. In the year 2000, the 40% higher tax rate was reserved for people earning roughly 1.5 times the median wage, a genuinely comfortable margin above ordinary earnings. Today, that same 40% band catches anyone earning just 1.25 times the median. The definition of high earner, for tax purposes, has quietly crept downward to swallow ordinary professional salaries that were never supposed to sit inside it. Teachers, engineers, mid-level managers, the precise people most likely to describe themselves as middle class are now routinely paying the tax rate that was originally designed for people considerably wealthier than them. Consider someone earning £95,000 in 2021, receiving a modest, entirely reasonable 2% pay rise every year since. By now, their salary has grown by several £1,000s. On paper, that looks like genuine career progress. In practice, because the thresholds around them never moved, a steadily larger share of that growth has been quietly reclassified into higher tax bands year after year without a single conversation ever happening about it at their kitchen table. Multiply that pattern across an entire decade, and the cumulative extra tax paid purely from frozen thresholds, rather than any change in the actual rules, can run into tens of thousands of pounds over a career. Push further up the income scale, and the trap becomes even sharper. Once you earn over £100,000, you begin losing your personal allowance entirely at a rate of £1 for every £2 earned above that threshold, creating an effective marginal tax rate of 60% on that specific slice of income. Roughly 2 million taxpayers are projected to fall into this exact trap by the current tax year, a number that keeps climbing every year the threshold itself refuses to move. Now layer the second force directly on top of the first, while your take-home share has been quietly shrinking. The fixed costs surrounding your life have not stood still either. Rent or a mortgage, priced against the 267% rise in housing values, now consumes a genuinely historic share of net income for anyone without a paid-off home. In a way, it simply did not for the generation before. Council tax, energy, childcare where relevant. None of these have been frozen the way the tax thresholds have. They have moved upward every single year, while the government quietly agreed with itself not to adjust the other side of the equation to match. This is the pincer movement, and it has a history worth understanding, because it did not start recently. Real wages fell by over 7% for men and nearly 2% for women in the years following the 2008 financial crisis, with younger workers hit hardest of all. A scar that many households never fully recovered from before the next shock arrived. Between late 2021 and the middle of 2023, as inflation peaked above 11%, real wages fell again for 20 consecutive months, the longest sustained squeeze in living memory for most people watching this video. Wages have technically been growing faster than inflation again more recently, which sounds like relief, right up until fiscal drag quietly claws back a meaningful share of that recovery before it ever reaches your actual bank balance. Fiscal drag quietly shrinks the share of each pay rise you actually keep. Rising fixed costs quietly consume a larger share of whatever is left. Neither one, on its own, would necessarily be catastrophic. Together, applied every single year, compounding against each other across an entire working life, they produce the exact sensation so many people in the middle of Britain report and struggle to explain to anyone who has not sat down and actually followed the numbers, earning more on paper year after year while somehow having noticeably less room to breathe with each one that passes. None of this means the situation is hopeless, and it is genuinely not a story about individual failure because nothing about fiscal drag responds to better budgeting, a stricter spreadsheet, or cutting back on coffee. You cannot outsave a frozen threshold, no matter how disciplined you become. What you can do is understand precisely what is happening to your own pay slip rather than quietly absorbing the blame for it as some personal failure of restraint. Check exactly which tax band your current salary sits in, not the one you assumed you were in 5 years ago, because the line has almost certainly moved closer to you than you realize. If you are anywhere near the £100,000 mark, understand the 60% trap well in advance, because pension contributions specifically can pull your taxable income back below that threshold, restoring the allowance you would otherwise lose entirely, effectively handing you back money the system was quietly about to take. And when the next pay rise arrives, resist the instinct to treat the full headline figure as genuinely new money, because a portion of it, quietly and legally, was never going to be yours to spend in the first place. The middle class in Britain does not feel poorer because it is spending recklessly. It feels poor because the machinery underneath its payslips has been deliberately left unadjusted for years while everything surrounding it kept moving. Understanding that difference will not fix the policy, but it will stop you carrying the guilt for a gap that was never actually yours to close. If you learned something from this video, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.